Fallout 4, a game which received a wide variety of opinions on launch, and continues to be a talking point surrounding good and bad role-playing games. There were people who hated it, saying it's no true RPG and an insult to the franchise. Then there's people who loved it, saying they've had a ton of fun with the game and still play it to this day. And of course all those in between. So many times I've seen forums asking the question, what's your unpopular gaming opinion? And every time, without fail, I see comments saying, my unpopular opinion is that Fallout 4 is a good game, which leads me to believe that it isn't an unpopular opinion at all. So here's a look about how I feel about the game, with a pretty non-spoiler review of Fallout 4. Before talking about the game, I think it's important to understand me and my history of the Fallout franchise. Look, if you want to skip this part, I get it, but I feel that unless you understand the mindset of a reviewer, you never really know if their opinions will correlate with yours. So, my first Fallout game was Fallout 3, around 2011, I think? I was young and only used to fast-paced shooters, and so I got frustrated with the game, as I was constantly out of ammo and being punished for not being prepared for a fight. So I put down Fallout 3 after a few hours, and some time later tried Fallout New Vegas. And suddenly it all clicked with me. I won't get into the details of New Vegas, but I loved it and still love it to this day. I've also tried the original 1997 Fallout game, and while I can appreciate it being a good game, it's just not for me. So anyway, I loved New Vegas so much that Fallout 4 was my most anticipated game for years. And then that glorious day came when the trailer released. Then shortly after, Todd himself presented a pretty incredible showcase at E3. It's probably the most hyped I've ever been for a game release. I even took this photo on my phone showing me pre-installing it on the 6th of November 2015. Then finally I had it. And while I have many thoughts about the game, I've been playing it ever since. And as a final note, as for how I play these types of games, I'm a very roleplay centric person. So I like to take things slow and do stuff that I feel my character would want to do, not necessarily what's best for my stats and such. The look of this game is honestly a mixed bag. Sometimes you'll look at a piece of scenery with the lighting hitting just right, and it creates a screenshot-worthy moment. And obviously that's the type of footage I've been using for this video. But also there are plenty of moments where it does feel dated, where quite a few technical aspects just don't really hold up, especially if you compare it to modern RPGs. It strays from the darker colour palette of Fallout 3, and offers a somewhat vibrant look to the post-apocalypse. The textures and NPCs are just fine. They're nothing great, but they're not distractingly bad. What really carries the graphics is the world design and models. Part of my love for the Fallout franchise comes from the blend of the 50s retro aesthetics with the grim apocalyptic setting. Even if the game looks average or below average by today's standards, it's just such a visually interesting world. From the lone radio towers to the abandoned shopping marts, there's just so much variety and storytelling going on from the visuals alone. If there's one thing that's undeniable about Bethesda Game Studios, it's that they know how to design a great looking world. Well, most of the time. My only gripe would be how it handles vegetation. A lot of post-apocalyptic settings show how overgrown the world becomes when humans aren't around, but Fallout prefers a barren and desolate look, and that's completely fine, it works for the franchise. But Fallout 4 has a bunch of grass and trees that are all just a dull brown colour, and for me it does create an unappealing blandness to the world. So overall, the textures, NPCs and colour palette is solidly average, but the great models and world design more than make up for it. And finally, with the performance, it's, a Bethesda game. It's nowhere near as buggy as it was on launch, although there's still plenty to find. And I must admit, how many of the PC settings are handled is just unforgivable. Like on a fresh install, I still have to go into the game files to change stuff like the locked FPS, the mouse acceleration, and when using anything other than a standard 1080p monitor, the aspect ratio can just go all whack. So yeah, I forget about these things because I usually play a modded game where it's all fixed, but with the vanilla version, all this stuff still lingers and it's just such a headache. And with the FPS, it honestly runs smoothly for most of the time. But then you enter the Boston city, and yeah, the game engine simply wasn't designed to run such a dense area. Given how old the game is now, more modern hardware will run it fine, but still there's just a lot of optimization problems, and it's such a shame that they linger. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as I can, but again I will be talking about the first hour and general premise of the game. When it comes to the complaints about Fallout 4, a lot of it stems from the story, and I feel there are some huge mistakes which contribute to this, with the biggest being the inclusion of a voice protagonist with a pre-established background. This is the first voice protagonist in a Fallout game, and you know what? The voice actors do a pretty good job. However, I believe having a voice protagonist with a background that's already detailed just doesn't work for this game. I'm going to make the comparison to Skyrim, as part of that game's infinite replayability is how much of a blank canvas the player character is. Yes, you'll always be the Dragonborn, but after the 20-minute intro, you're pushed out into the world knowing barely anything about yourself or why you're here. And because of that, you create the story in your head. Want to be a psychomaniac who arrived in Skyrim to murder everyone they meet? You can be that. Want to be a noble hero of the Stormcloaks, whose only goal is to aid the war effort? You can be that as well. It's the beauty of a protagonist with no background, and it's part of what makes Skyrim great. On the other end of the spectrum, you have RPGs with pre-established characters, like Geralt from The Witcher, or Shepard from Mass Effect. These are just as good, as they're complex characters with a rich history and compelling relationships, and so you just naturally fall into the character's mindset when playing. But Fallout 4 did a huge sin by not fully committing to either of these concepts. You play as a caring parent whose child is kidnapped and then taken into the wasteland, and so you must follow the clues to find him again. And so fine, you're a character with a pre-established history. The problem with this is that the character then has no other development than that, which will make you think you can play them however you like. But the game has already established that you're a caring parent searching for your son, so you're not a blank canvas. What this results in is you wanting to do whatever you want, but feeling weird doing anything other than the main questline. Because why on earth would you be farming and helping random strangers when you have a missing son? Also relating to the voice protagonist is the choice of dialogue options. In previous games, there were usually between 3 and 7 dialogue choices every time you wanted to say something. But in Fallout 4, there's 4 dialogue options for every single time you speak. This means that times where you want more dialogue variety is limited to 4 choices, and times where you don't have much to say is also forced into 4 choices, except they all just say the same sentence but said slightly differently. It really limits the amount of roleplay, and every conversation is just asking questions and replying to quests with either "yeah, I'll help you" or "yeah, I'll help you if you pay me more." As for the main quest itself, it's a solid meh. The locations you visit are a lot more interesting than the actual story, and boy is it hard to care about a son you knew as an infant for like 5 minutes at the start of the game. It doesn't help that the characters are also a mixed bag. The antagonists are pretty lackluster, although you do get the odd gem like Valentine. In fact, the game does a pretty good job with its companions. And finally there's the side quests, which again is mixed, though I'd say it's more positive than the main questline. Yes, there's the usual fetch quests and such, but with some side content, you can really tell the team working on it put a lot of effort. Some have horror aspects, some are about helping NPCs deal with personal issues, and some are just straight up crazy, like helping a band of robot pirates fly a wooden ship into the air. It's these side quests that end up sticking with me, and it's just such a shame that they're overshadowed by finding some child. Even though combat is a huge part of the gameplay, I'll be talking about it in the section after this, just to keep things more organised. So, you're presented with this big open world, you've got missions to complete, but how does it actually play? As is a staple for the franchise, you start out by picking your skills, such as strength, agility, intelligence, and so on. Depending on how high each of these skills are, it will determine which perks you can get for your character, and I have quite mixed opinions on this system. On the one hand, I really like the idea that if you're not skilled enough in one attribute, then you simply can't unlock every perk in that tree. And so at the start of every new playthrough, you can really make characters feel wildly different from each other. But the problem is then if you want to increase your agility, for example, you can just simply put a perk point in it, which are pretty easy to get. And there's just something about that which doesn't feel earned. I think it'd work better from an RPG standpoint if you could only increase your stats by performing certain tasks, such as improving your agility by running a lot. And as for the perks themselves, many of them feel uninspired, like offering extra damage with rifles and better sneaking. With your attributes chosen, you're tackled with the goal of surviving the wasteland. So first things first, looting. And this is something Fallout is just great at. In every building or pile of rubble, you'll find stuff, be it junk, medical supplies, ammo and so on. And it's such a simple thing, but it just really encourages you to explore every nook and cranny of the world, because all of this loot ties into crafting, which I'll get back to. But basically, every piece of junk can be broken down into components, and those components can be used to craft better items. And again, it's such a simple thing, but adding value to every item in the game is such a great idea. I remember exploring an underground tunnel far from my home, and my inventory is full of glass items I needed to craft scopes for my weapons. But then, I came across a heavy rocket launcher that I wanted to use. Now, almost every other game, it would be obvious that you'd just chuck out all the glass items crowding your inventory and pick up the cool rocket launcher. But in Fallout 4, that glass is really valuable, and so I had to decide what to take and what to leave. Now, I know to some people that sounds like a nightmare, as I know inventory management isn't always appealing, but personally, it really immerses me into the world, as it makes you feel like someone in the apocalypse who has to make compromises to survive. Now going back to the crafting I mentioned, honestly, I'm still unsure how I feel about it, because I kinda think that crafting is too good. It's incredibly satisfying to collect a bunch of junk, and with it turn a mediocre weapon or armour into something truly powerful. However, the problem is that with the right perks selected, you can create some great gear with relative ease. It's a thing that can take you out of the roleplay side of Fallout, as it's like, okay, I guess my character who just got out the vault knows how to build a sniper barrel for a laser gun, and then when you eventually find one in the wasteland, there's a sense of, I could just craft this if I want it. Although there is an attempt at countering this, in the form of legendary items. So whenever you kill a legendary creature, it will drop a weapon or armor piece with a legendary effect, such as 20% chance to cripple target, or plus 100 damage resistance when reloading, and so on. And I get that it adds a bit more randomness to the world, but it's just another thing that pushes the game towards being a looter shooter that focuses more on RNG and getting the best stats. But moving on, you've selected your perks, you've looted and crafted some good gear, what comes next? Obviously the main thing is to talk to NPCs, take on quests and discover new areas and loot. It's a simple gameplay loop that works. But you can also work on building up your very own settlements. With all the loot you've gathered along the way, you can secure a plot of land and build your own house. If you wish, you can then place a radio tower to call for settlers to come stay, and things essentially become a miniature management sim. You'll need to provide food, water and defences for an ever-growing population, all while you can build the settlement to look however you want. Now there's been constant discourse around this feature. It's clear Bethesda put a lot of attention into this, and these settlements can be found all across the wasteland. But there's many people out there who simply don't care about building, and they wish that more effort was spent on improving other aspects of the game. Which is completely fair, and I get why you would have that complaint. But there's another common complaint, and it's that the game forces you to interact with settlement building. And honestly, I completely disagree. At the start of the game, and about midway through, there's a couple of main missions which require you to build settlement items to progress, but it's like 1% of the main quest line. And after you've been introduced to the settlements, you really don't have to interact with it. I simply view it as a mechanic that's there if you love building, but can be easily ignored if you don't. And finally, I want to talk about survival mode. Fallout 4 has the usual difficulty settings, easy, normal, hard, and so on, and it obviously doesn't matter what difficulty anyone plays a game on. However, Fallout 4 has a survival mode, and to me that's absolutely the only way to play. Other than the usual increased difficulty stuff like more damaging enemies, it adds the need to eat, sleep, drink, and cure diseases. I know that to some people those features are nothing but a chore, but again, as someone who wants to be immersed into this post-apocalyptic world, it makes complete sense that you'd need these things to survive. And they just add a whole new dynamic to the game, as on top of looting weapons, armour and junk, you'll also want to find water and plant your own food. You know, wastelandy stuff. The combat in previous Fallout games was incredibly janky. In Fallout 3 you couldn't aim down sights, and in New Vegas you couldn't sprint with your weapon out, and it just felt very stiff. But when Fallout 4 released, it was a night and day difference. The combat feels really good, and even people who don't like the game will admit how much better the gunplay is. And okay, I might be making it sound like the best combat ever, which it isn't, but for an open world RPG it does a pretty good job. The only thing is that the melee combat falls a little flat, where basically it's just swing and block, but it gets the job done. And what helps is the variety of weapons. It's unfortunate that early on in the game, all you find are the ugly pipe weapons, but by the end of a playthrough, there's a satisfying amount to choose from, especially if you remember you can customize every single weapon. As for the enemy variety, the humans are pretty lackluster, with low-level bandits and high-level soldiers feeling somewhat the same to fight against. It's the creatures that really stand out, as each come with their own unique attacks and movement patterns, and they take more to defeat than a simple headshot. Also, the enemy AI is fine, I guess. We expect more by today's standards, but some enemies will stand in the open and shoot, some will get into cover, and some will run at you with a melee weapon. Pretty basic stuff. And finally, I'll end with a complaint, which is that the combat is a little too forgiving. In New Vegas, if your character is not good with handling weapons, your aiming would sway and your accuracy would be way off. But in Fallout 4, if you have good aim with a controller or mouse and keyboard, you'll be landing most of your shots right from the get-go, which can make things a little too easy. I've always loved the Fallout soundtracks, and luckily Fallout 4 continues the trend with a bunch of bangers. Just listening to old-timey tunes while exploring the wasteland never gets old. As for the OST, the music is very much background ambience that's just a flavour to the world, rather than something you want to turn to max volume like Skyrim's soundtrack. And with the audio in general, it does a pretty dang good job of creating satisfying sounds which fit the setting. They go pretty hand in hand with the instantly recognisable world of Fallout. It's topped off with some satisfying voice acting, and while sure some NPCs sound a bit off, I'd say overall there are a lot of great voices to find, especially with companions. Have a listen to the audio for yourself. Fallout 4 with its DLC is so cheap on sale that if you plan on getting the game, just get it as a bundle as it will almost be the same price. Although I could do an entire video on the DLC, so I will keep it brief. All the workshop DLC just offers more workshop stuff to do, like capturing animals, running factories, and even running your own vault. It's pretty simple, so if you like the workshop mode, you'll like these. If not, you'll never interact with it. The Automatron DLC is kinda brief but enjoyable. It's like a really strong side quest, where the story is decent, and it brings you to interesting locations with new enemies. Definitely worth a play. Then there's Far Harbor, which I think is incredible. It's honestly better than the base game, offering a new landscape, new enemies, new weapons, a new companion, and most importantly, a solid main story with actual difficult choices and consequence. And finally there's Nuka World, which I'd say is a really good idea with a messy execution. The new landscape offers a ton of variety and things to find, but the story doesn't do it for me, and only really makes sense if you're playing a character who's fine with casually talking to raiders. So overall, it's worth picking up the DLC because it's so cheap, and if anything, just make sure to play Far Harbor. There's the argument that I shouldn't talk about mods, because it's not what Bethesda offered, which is fair, but Bethesda have actively supported the modding scene, and even have an in-game mod menu. Plus there's no ignoring the fact that for me and a lot of other people out there, playing this game with mods is the only way we play. So I can't speak for the mods offered on console, but for PC, the Fallout 4 modding scene is incredible. Want to turn the game into a harsh Metro-style survival? Go ahead. Want to turn it into a Call of Duty-style shooter? Yep, you can do that. Or want to turn it into a giant city-building sim? Mods have got you covered. As a channel which covers mod lists, I've seen Fallout 4 look 100 different ways, and I'm constantly impressed by what modders are able to achieve. Even the entirety of Fallout 3 and New Vegas are being remade in Fallout 4, so honestly at this point, I see the base game of Fallout 4 as a template to be moulded into whatever you want. I personally mod the game so combat is incredibly deadly, in a world where loot is scarce, and wounds need to be patched up with new medical kits. I'm even able to mod out the voice of the main protagonist, and give my player an alternate start so I can truly feel like whoever I want to be, which for me takes Fallout 4 from a good game to a great game. Just try some mods, if you can. Fallout 4 is a flawed game, and as someone who's poured hundreds of hours into it, I'll never deny that some of those flaws are pretty bad. The choice of who the protagonist is, combined with the average main story and iffy dialogue, takes away from the RPG aspects. However, to look at the main quest alone is a disservice to the game. There's a lot Fallout 4 gets right, and to me personally, it far outweighs the bad. Bethesda are great at creating landscapes and atmosphere, and Fallout 4 is no exception. The feeling of wandering through some ruined buildings, searching for loot, keeping an eye out for traps and enemies, all while a 1940s tune plays on the radio, just creates an incredible tone that few other games are able to match. And despite the lacking dialogue options, there's still loads of memorable quests to be found, ones that'll stick with you long after completion. Throw mods on top, and this game can be crafted into a truly incredible experience. If you've never tried a Fallout game, Fallout 4 is a great place to start. If you've played older Fallout games but not this one, then it's still worth giving a go, just be prepared for the roleplay changes. And if you played Fallout 4 but could never get into it, it really is worth going through the plethora of mods available to improve the game. I don't like putting a number on things, but for the sake of comparison, I'd give the base game of Fallout 4 a 7 out of 10, but with my fully modded playthroughs, I'd honestly give it a 9 out of 10 with just how much you can tailor the experience. No matter the flaws, I've had so many great memories of Fallout 4, and it remains my most played game on Steam to this day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like, as it helps the channel grow. And in the comments let me know how you feel about Fallout 4, or if you're thinking of jumping in, especially now the TV series is out. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, Mr. Zud, Gorthan, Sodoomy, Gavin Van Buren, Connor Peterson, Esteban, John Ratz, Ter Aura, Jaden Shaw, Jake Carlo, Jack Ma and Christian Howell. I like to spend a lot of time on these videos and making sure that they're, good quality. I don't want to just quickly record stuff without a script or anything and with basic gameplay and shove it out and say good enough and do that every week. I like taking my time, but unfortunately, YouTube algorithm doesn't like that, and I don't get any revenue from these videos, and so I'm hugely thankful for any contributions. It really does mean a lot to me. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone, and goodbye.